So this could be much more intense than even what is pictured here. And Rebecca mentioned my work on Buffalo Bayou Park years ago. The first master plan finally got all built out in 2015. But developers, believe me, understand the value of parks. Parks create real estate value. And so now many developers, you'll see this picture, Buffalo Bayou Park on the left, and then they're trading on that on the right as they try to sell their apartments or condos or whatever they do. So this is not a surprise to anybody. By the way, Buffalo Bayou Greenways, which creates 150 miles of linear parks along all of Houston's major waterways, that was not an altruistic effort. That was city leaders having been embarrassed in Houston. Like in the 2012, when they tried to get the 2012 Olympics, they wouldn't even come down and visit Houston. They viewed, Houston basically as a hellhole. Now, Houston is an acquired taste. I loved it, but it's not what somebody would actually, naturally be drawn to. So they realize if we're going to be competitive, if we're going to attract young people to this city, we have to make the quality of life much, much better here. And so, major philanthropies like the Kingers, they put up the seed money for Bayou Greenways 2020. A $100 million bond issue passed with 68% of the vote. That's creating parks, that's creating value for your community. And what Baltimore is doing is destroying that. So, with Inner Harbor Park, you go out there on any day, it's not really broken. It's a beautiful place. Could it use a refresh? Sure. And there's many wonderful landscape architects working around the country that could do an incredibly beautiful job here. But this is not really the solution. Converting this, large chunks of it to private property is not the solution. And by the way, I should just push that gray box a little further over because, part of this process, it's not only the heights and the changes of use, the promenades get reduced to, a minimum of 20 feet, although there's exceptions for that. And the promenades would be owned by the private developer. And there would be a public easement, but the developer gets to set rules that have to be approved by the city. But imagine you have 900 residents here, and then how they would start to feel about this use of even the promenades. Now there are problems with downtown, and the MCB proposal is being touted as a cure for what ails downtown. But there's real problems downtown that need to be fixed. And I prepared this slideshow before the news came out that the city has now cut the cord on the super block. But the situation's been languishing for years. One of my first meetings with the AIA, they're based in Charles Center. Got there a little early. I said, I'm going to walk over to Lexington Market and see what that new thing is about. And I walked through there. I go, oh my God, this is pretty rough. And this needs to be fixed badly. So MCB is, a talented developer. Maybe the city could redirect them to this area and fix this. And, the Inner Harbor is still very popular. Attracts a lot of people on event days. Your Fleet Week, that was just this year. Peruvian training ship visit. The Christmas Village. I was just riding my bike through there this week on Saturday for when the running festival is going on. So there's nothing really wrong with this place as a park, and it still draws a lot of people. The other thing that can be done downtown is to build on some of these vacant lots. And MCB has a vacant lot right across the street on Pratt Street. Why not build apartments there? That's exactly where they should belong. And that was really the original concept behind the urban redevelopment plan. Put the large buildings around Pratt Street and Light Street and frame the Inner Harbor that way, much as Central Park is framed by, Central Park West and Fifth Avenue. And then, this Mechanic Theater site that people complain about, building got torn down, nothing result. Now, as I said earlier, there is a problem with the pavilions themselves. And probably they've been mismanaged. But there was a very similar problem up in Boston, up at the Faneuil Hall Marketplace, which was a Rouse project. And it was, if you read the fine print down there, it was owned by Ashkenazi, and it says, an arm of the global lending group, the J. Safra Group, has acquired Faneuil Hall Marketplace from Ashkenazi Acquisition Corporation, whose management of the iconic property under a lease with the city has long drawn complaints from tenants and public officials. Does that sound familiar? Now, did anybody reach out to these guys and say, hey, can you come down here and bid on Harbour Place? I don't know. It might have been a good idea. And, you know, there's a lot of redevelopment right here in Baltimore we're in one space right now. An older building, much tougher job, by the way, I imagine, than the pavilions at Harbour Place. You have the R House that's been redeveloped. You have Cross Street and Federal Hill. There's a lot of good examples right here in Baltimore. And this is a great job, too. This is in a very challenging part of town, and a challenging old building, and these guys made it work. Were these guys offered $1 million to come and fix Harbour Place? I don't know. But I'm sure there are other people who would have jumped at the opportunity if they had been offered those kind of subsidies. And people, you know, I actually read through the public comments that were, MCB pulled. There were 2 comments that occurred late in the process. One was that, oh, this should be like a livable city with apartments above shops. That would work very nicely, again, in the superblock area. And somebody even said very late in the process, there should be 2 skinny towers there. I have no idea where that kind of came from. But most of the people, the vast majority of the comments were, I want a green space, I want stuff to do. For every comment about, no, maybe there should be residential, there was 10 comments that we should have a beer hall or a food club down there. And a lot of people pointed to this. This is a torpedo factory in Alexandria, Virginia, which has been converted to artist uses. This is a building very much like the pavilions, and it's a waterfront building too. Waterside in Norfolk, Virginia, food that activates and cultivates the surrounding area. And there's a lot of people who talked about having a performance space. Some said a black box space, which would be a little unfortunate on a beautiful waterfront location. But this is the Allen Room, Jazz at Lincoln Center on Columbus Circle. And if you ever get a chance to go to this room, it's a gorgeous, gorgeous room. And it overlooks the Columbus Circle statue and Manhattan. How great would a performance space like this be in the Inner Harbor? And I don't think it would be a big leap to, do something, convert the pavilions to something like that. Now, of course, I've recognized even as a young architect who's done urban planning work, urban design work most of my career, a lot of it waterfront projects. The Inner Harbor Park has been the prototype for urban waterfront development ever since it was built. And it and Camden Yards are the 2 great contributions to urban design, world-class contributions that Baltimore has made in the last 50 years. And so they should be especially treasured for that. But they've set the precedent for waterfront redevelopment throughout the country. Baltimore itself has come up with many different ideas. Some people, as part of the public outreach, said, you should tear down that North Pavilion. Well, that idea was brought to bear in 2007, the Mahan-Reichel proposal, taking down the North Pavilion, which, by the way, has its drawbacks. It turns its back on Pratt Street. It's not very friendly in that direction. It blocks views. Hey, why not, if there's an economic burden with these things, why not just tear them down? And then you open up downtown straight through to the harbor. And then it becomes a much more valuable park than it even is today. There was also the Inner Harbor 2.0 plan, and it was very comprehensive. It wasn't, back of the room, quick renderings. There was a lot of people involved in this, and it was very much a landscape-based plan. And yes, it does make that connection with McKeldin Plaza, which some people find problematic, but that's obviously, it shows us this is not a new idea. This has been around for a long time, and this is really talking about making the park even a better park than it already is. It's thinking of this space as what it is. It's a park first. It's not a real estate development. It's a park first, and it happens to have a couple of buildings on it which provides activation that you would like to see in a park, restaurants, those kind of things. And by the way, as long as we're talking about $400 million, if the state is going to provide the city with $400 million, why do we need these apartment complexes? Why don't we just spend that money on making it an even better park? And as Erban says, buy the developer out. I'm not sure what he really paid for that, by the way. I've tried to get the assumption documents. They're not to be had. So who knows what the exact agreement was with Deutsche Bank? I think it would be good to know. But yeah, whatever it is, buy them out. And I think the present day market value of those pavilions is probably not that high. Charles Center, I think, sold for a little over $4 million. So I think a deal could have been had the city been aggressive on that. Sorry, I went back and looked at a Baltimore Magazine article. I think it's from 2021. And I think it was the head of the Economic Development Corporation saying, well, we don't want to get into condemnation or anything like that. We just want to let the receivership process play out. Why is the city not more proactive with all this? Why are they shoving this off to somebody else, including a private developer, exclusive to one private developer, instead of doing the job themselves? That plan also emphasized connectivity, which is important. Trying to get to the Inner Harbor is a problem. And access was something that was also mentioned in the public comments. And, Conway Street between, the stadiums and the Inner Harbor, it's pretty bleak. Couldn't that be improved? Trying to go from downtown, the idea of the wall, the buildings framing the Inner Harbor, but even between Lombard Street and Pratt Street, it's all garage entrances. It's not that appealing. So work can be done in that regard. Rebecca provided the inspirational sidewalk medallions, even something. Make those connections. So that's really more important than putting parking places out there. There was even ideas, this was an AIA competition in 2019 about really focusing on resiliency. This is a Morgan State studio, students, taking it to, maybe an extreme where you're reclaiming the floodplain, the Jones Falls floodplain. But keep in mind that even with the apartments they're in the floodplain. And yes, you can build higher out of the floodplain, but when the big flood happens, and if you were in Sarasota recently, or if you're around Hurricane Sandy, the streets are going to flood all around you. And by the way, I have a lot of experience with this in Houston too. So, building apartments in a floodplain is never a good idea. So I'm going to talk about a couple of the projects that Rebecca mentioned. This one is the Brooklyn Eastern District Terminal, which I built in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. Whoops, turn this back. And of course, you all probably know, like Baltimore, the New York waterfront was all industry, wharfs, it was piers, and the same was in Brooklyn and in Williamsburg. And the site I was working on was, whoops.
Hit the top button.
Okay. This is the, okay, good. So the site I had was right up here. It's the old Brooklyn Eastern District Terminal. You can see the rail yards. This is where they'd bring the barges in, they'd offload the barges, they'd put this stuff in the warehouses, and then they would ship them out to the rest of Long Island. And when I got there, all the buildings had been torn down. You know, that operation ceased in like the 1980s. Yet some of the old remnants remained on site. And it would basically become a junkyard, a dumping ground. And Mayor Giuliani at the time said this would be a great place for a garbage transfer station. So the neighbors got together and they formed an organization called Neighbors Against Garbage, or NAG. And they nagged then Governor Pataki to come up with $10 million of land and water conservation money to acquire this site, which the governor did. And so it was like $8.3 million of the 10 went to acquisition. Well, that didn't leave a lot of money to build a park, so the site remained vacant for years. And it had some vernacular park use. People would come, this is where the brass bands would come to practice. This is where people would come to practice pyrotechnics. You know, you could get away with a lot of stuff out here. And of course, people came to enjoy the sunsets and smoke pot and drink beer and look at Manhattan. But I said, you know, this can't go on. We got to do something with this site. And even if our resources are very limited. So I took the $1.7 million and basically we cleaned up the site. We brought in clean fill. We kept the old warehouse slabs because I was thinking, you know, this could be a festival space. This could be concerts. This could be flea markets. This could be anything. And why ruin the grass? And when you got these things. There's an old locomotive shed that makes a great terrace right by the water. There was the old gantry walls. So you can see what it looked like in the upper left when I got there, just a lot of junk. But nature was starting to take over the site too, which was inspiration. And so now you see us cleaning it up a bit. And then that same extension of North 8th Street with the park open. And then just, redeveloped with a meadow and the gantries there. And this was like $1.7 million. This did not cost a lot of money. And we had no trouble attracting activity there. We didn't have to make stuff up. People would come here. There was concerts that were happening in the McCarran Park pool, which was also derelict at the time. They started fixing the pool up, so the concerts coming over to our site. Oops. And we drew 8,000 people at night. It's more difficult designing the concert setup than it was the park itself. We had the smorgasbord, artisanal food market, which again people called for here in the public comments. We had movie night, and then as we got money from revenue from those events, we started putting in things like solar lights and a naturalistic playground. So it's not hard to activate spaces like this. And so then finally I'm going to talk about Brooklyn Bridge Park. Now Brooklyn Bridge Park, it is 1.3 miles of the Brooklyn waterfront, as you can see there. It's old Port Authority piers. Again, the whole Port Authority business in New York, went by the wayside. It all moved to New Jersey. And so there was these unused piers. They all had metal sheds on them. And the Port Authority was going to liquidate these piers. And they worked with a private developer. And what was the idea there? Tall apartment buildings. But the piers are also below Brooklyn Heights, which is right up here. And you can see the tiers of the Brooklyn Queens Expressway there. That's Robert Moses' project. He was going to put the Interstate 278 right through Brooklyn Heights, but the people in Brooklyn Heights had a little clout. So they were able to push back on Robert Moses, and they got Moses to put a very inventive cantilever system of highway underneath Brooklyn Heights, and then build a promenade on top. And with the promenade came very strict controls over the view shed, so the people of Brooklyn Heights could look at the Brooklyn Bridge and look at Lower Manhattan. And these apartment towers down there below was going to ruin that. So they fought hard against that. and they organized, and they went through a number of community planning processes, and they got the city and state to come up with $150 million to create a new park here. So that's when I got there. And I got there just, to get the project off the ground. And you can say, the big deal with that, though, was the state and city were going to put up that money, but the park had to be economically self-sustaining. And parks are always the first thing to get cut, in budgets. They are never supported properly. So to make this work, there had to be an economic component that would support the park. And that's where private development came in. And then even residential development. So you see those white buildings behind Pier 1 there? There's a hotel to the left and condos. Those are on the site of an old warehouse, a late 1800s warehouse that was falling apart. And so the height of those buildings, the ground leases and payments in lieu of taxes from those buildings go directly to support park operations. And even the height of the air conditioning equipment on top was very strictly prescribed to preserve those views. So development for a specific purpose and very tightly controlled. And so here you see the overall plan, the 6 piers, Pier 1, which we just saw, Pier 2, which actually kept some of the old sheds and as shade structures for basketball courts and other athletic fields. Pier 3 is very naturalistic. Pier 5 is soccer fields. Pier 6 has a great playground in it. And then in the upland areas, that area was mounted to shield the rest of the park from the noise from Brooklyn, from the BQE, which was actually designed to funnel noise away from Brooklyn Heights and out. So very clever design, respectful of the site by Michael Van Valkenburg Associates. And further up, you see some of the old industrial sites and the old warehouse sites up there that were preserved. So this was a general project plan that was created and controlled, and this is what I did, created and controlled by the city and the state. We hired the landscape architect, we hired the economic consultants, we hired the engineers, we hired everybody as part of this team. There's full environmental impact statements, very, very detailed, complex planning that went into this. And you can see the development sites are those white blocks, Empire Stores, the hotel and condos behind Pier 1. There was a big old, massive warehouse building down below by Pier 6 that we brought into the plan, and a couple of apartment buildings down there. This is a view of Pier 1 from Brooklyn Bridge Park. This is the playground on Pier 6. How cool would this be in Baltimore? With, apartments across the way on Pratt Street, and then a playground like this within the park. This is the area just north of the Brooklyn Bridge. These are 2 of the old historic structures there. This is the tobacco warehouse, which my former boss saved. It was 5 stories, it was crumbling. He managed to save at least 2 floors of it, the shell of it. And we hosted U2 down there on one of their promotional tours. And there's a great avant-garde theater company down there, St. Anne's Warehouse, that that put on a production there. And that became part of the park, and St. Anne's Warehouse moved into the shell, but one triangular piece of the shell was preserved for an outdoor garden. And then this is the Empire Stores, very historic building. You see the photo by Bernice Abbott from 1936. It was a old coffee warehouse, very basic building. It was just masonry and old growth timbers and metal shutters. That was it. No electricity, no plumbing, no nothing. So not an easy building to work with, but it was also redeveloped, and it has retail on the ground floor, it has offices above, it has the Brooklyn Historical Society, and then you can see from one of the upper floors the view out the window towards a carousel that the local developer, Willentis, had preserved, and the carousel enclosure is designed by the fancy French architect Jean Nouveau. And there you go, there's the view from outside. And by the way, this was under very strict historic preservation controls too. So there's a lot you can do, and then with these buildings. So quick summary of the difference between Brooklyn Bridge Park and what the MCB proposal. Brooklyn Bridge Park, the city and the state created the plan. MCB proposal, a private developer creates the plan for a public park. The plan creates parkland. MCB, the plan takes away parkland. And by the way, there was a letter from the city solicitor to the city council advising them that, state case law says that you cannot make private uses in a public park. You're not allowed to do that. So what was the answer to that? Was it, oh boy, gosh, we made a mistake. I guess we'll have to eliminate the apartments. No, the answer was, we're going to excise the land. And that's the term of art. We're going to excise that land from the park. We're going to remove it from the park. And that's what the voters are being asked to vote on here. We're removing parkland from Baltimore City so we can accommodate a private residential development. That's the issue, folks. That is the fundamental issue. So the other comparisons. Development sites are secondary to the park and tightly controlled. Here, development sites dominate the park with increased footprint and unlimited height. Development ground rents and payments in lieu of taxes go directly to the park at Brooklyn Bridge Park. Development ground rents and taxes go, I don't know where, general fund, I guess. It's not supporting the park, that's for sure. Development repurposes existing resources like the Empire Stores. Development removes existing resources. They say the greenest building is the building we keep, by the way. And development sites are competitively bid, very under strict bidding proposals. Here you have a sole source developer that was basically paid $1 million to come up with its own plan for a park. So with that, I would suggest that the voters in Baltimore say no thanks to this proposal. And they get the state and the city to do the job that they should have done in the first place, to control what happens to Inner Harbor Park, and to think of this always as a park first. Thank you very much.
Bring up a chair with Anirban and face our audience.